Photosynthesis Biolab Review. This is going to be a combined one between your first and second photosynthesis labs, which you should have done this week and last week, with the first one being over absorbance and the second one being over the oxidation of water. So let's just get right into lab 1, which is for the quiz this week. So basically what this first lab did for us is it introduced us to this thing called the absorption spectrum for certain pigments within chlorophylls. And what that is this spectrum, this range from like 0 to 600 of wavelengths that are measured using the photospectrometer that we've been using to measure like transparency in the hemolysis lab, and what we'll now be using to measure wavelength spectrum of certain pigments in chlorophyll. What we did in this lab is we took a few spinach leaves and we separated them, we chemically separated them after boiling them using petroleum ether, ethanol, and methanol. And this dissolved 3 different pigments and chemically separated them so that we could examine which wavelengths they absorbed and which wavelengths they emitted. So, what do you need to know for this lab now that we've gone over it conceptually? You need to know that the concentration of the pigment alters the height of the peaks, but not the absorbance of the peaks. This is important because we can distinguish pigments from each other by the location of their peaks. And by their location, I mean the wavelengths, their peak wavelengths where they're being emitted. This corresponds to the X values on your graph. And this is a confusing concept, but you also need to know that because plants are green, it absorbs every wavelength of light except the green. It wouldn't photosynthesize under green light. It would absorb some under blue light and it would absorb some under red, but it would not absorb any under green light. This is why hydroponic lights, they look like a combination of red and blue. They look like these purplish lights. It's because plants cannot absorb green, so it's kind of a waste of electricity for hydroponic lights to contain green. And finally, I'm not entirely sure if you need to know this equation, but you need to know that energy and wavelength are inversely proportional, because energy is directly proportional to 1 over the wavelength, meaning that when energy goes up, the wavelength goes down and vice versa.